All right, we'll call this session to order. I want to welcome everyone to the 11 o'clock session. Hope keynote in the first session was engaging for everyone. So I think you'll find this one as well. So I just want to introduce the session. This is the Yammer for Teaching and Learning. This is Faculty Engagement Designs, Outcomes, and Emerging Pedagogy. So if that's not what you're coming for, now is your time to find the one you were looking for. So I'm going to introduce our presenters here. So we have Susanna Lin, Professor of Political Sciences from the College of Liberal Arts. We have Jonathan Clark, Associate Professor in the College of Health and Human Development. And Brad Lint, a lecturer in English from Erie Barron campus. So Jonathan will start, and they will just present for about 10 to 12 minutes, and then we'll leave time for question and answer for about 10 minutes at the end.
Everybody. I'm Jonathan Clark. I'm actually an assistant professor, not an associate professor yet. As Matt said, in the Department of Health Policy and Administration, I've been here at Penn State for about 3 years, and I've loved every minute of it so far. And I'm happy to have the chance to talk a little bit about my use of Yammer in HPA 503. So let me start by giving you a little bit of context. So HPA 503 is a course that I've been teaching ever since I've been here at Penn State. It's a course on organizational behavior, and it's about people and groups and how they work and the implications for leaders and for managers. It's also a course that is focused on active learning. Participant-centered learning. So I, as the instructor, think of myself as a guide. There's very little lecturing. There's lots of discussion. And students are expected to play a leading role in their own learning in HPA 503. The course is designed to essentially address one topic per week. Each week, we cover that topic by pairing a theoretical framework with a case study. So we give them a chance to sort of learn a new theory, a new framework of thinking about people and organizations, and then give them an opportunity to apply that theory or framework to a real world situation. So that's the basic setup. I've been teaching this course residentially for 3 years, as I said, and about a year ago, I was invited to develop this course for the online environment as part of our new online Master of Health Administration program. And so I was very excited about this opportunity. Hadn't done anything online up to that point. And was really sort of energized about the prospect of exploring a new opportunity. But I was a little hesitant, a little unsure about how the learning environment that I created in the residential course would translate to an online environment. So in my mind, the challenge was to figure out how to turn a residential course into an asynchronous online course for experienced adults. Our online program is for people that have at least 5 years of work experience, without giving up my teaching philosophy and without substantial changes to the course design. So that was the challenge. And as you might have guessed, the solution was Yammer. And I need to note that Wendy Mahan, who's here, raise your hand, Wendy. Wendy deserves all of the credit for what I'm about to say about Yammer. So I just wanted to make that clear. But essentially the idea that Wendy came up with was to make Yammer the classroom. To turn Yammer into the classroom for the online version of HPA 503. So how do we do this? Well, again, this was all Wendy. We divided the students in the course, there were 30 of them, into 5 groups. Okay? And most of their work in the course was done within these groups. And we kept the basic structure of the course, one topic per week, and covered, again, each week a framework and a case study. So Monday through Wednesday of each week, the students read a framework and then went to Yammer and discussed that framework with their groups. Thursday to Sunday, they analyzed the case study and then again went to Yammer and discussed that case study with their groups. So that was the basic structure and design of the course. So how did we pull this off in Yammer? Well, one way to do this would have been to set up groups as part of the Penn State psu.edu Yammer network, the larger Penn State network. We decided that instead what we would do is create an HPA 503 network. And this allowed us to do a couple of things. One was it allowed us to have an HPA 503 group where we could have sort of class-wide discussions. But then it allowed us to embed within that group each of the 5 subgroups, where the students could spend most of their time engaging with their group members and discussing the course material. Okay? So, from a theoretical perspective, before we tried any of this, we thought the advantages of this approach would be that having a private network would provide us with an uncluttered space that's set apart just for HPA 503, a space where students would have limited distractions. We also thought it would make it easier for students to follow and review the discussions that took place during the course. And of course, there was a little selfish intent on my part. I thought that this would also make it easier for me to follow what was happening and evaluate the students' participation online. So this is a screenshot of one of the group spaces, Group 5, in HPA 503. And essentially, each discussion in the group spaces was started by me. I would post a discussion question. In this case, this was a discussion question about one of the frameworks that they were asked to read. And then the students' discussions would follow in the thread below that question. Okay. So let me make a couple of observations about how this worked out. One of the, what I thought, neat things that happened as the students gained facilitation with Yammer was they shifted from using Yammer in a web browser to using Yammer on their iPhones and iPads. And what this meant really was that the students could take the classroom with them everywhere that they went. Okay? And it allowed them to actually engage in what I think of as real-time learning. So here what I have is a screenshot of a student who was sitting in a meeting and experiencing something in his daily work life that he thought was relevant to his classmates, and literally just pulled out his iPhone and shared that experience with his classmates. So he says, I'm sitting in an interesting meeting that I thought I would share as it is bringing to mind many of the concepts we've been talking about the last couple of weeks. Okay, so he posts that, and then a really engaging discussion ensues as a result of it. So Yammer, in my mind, this was totally unexpected. This wasn't something I anticipated would happen. Yammer created opportunities for real-time learning in the classroom. So that's one thing that happened on the learning side. This is just another example. Another student, saw a graph of the Dow Jones Industrial Average, thought it would be relevant, posted it, and led to a great discussion among the students. On the teaching side, this course design created a lot of work for me. So you can see here, over the course of a 15-week semester, I posted 729 times. So it's almost 50 posts a week. Now some of those posts were just one sentence sort of responses to students, but some of them were more substantial. And this is on top of the efforts I had to make evaluating student contributions, evaluating their participation. So it did create a lot of work. I would say, teaching this course probably took a little bit more time than teaching a residential course. My residential courses, I usually spend 6 to 8 hours a week. This was probably more like 8 to 10. So, that's the observation on the teaching side. On the learning side, real-time learning. On the teaching side, a little more work. So what were the outcomes? The most important outcome is that the students really liked Yammer. I mean, when I say they really liked it, they loved it. How do I know this? Well, they said so. But I also know this because, so this is in our online program, they take all their classes together. They're in a cohort. So this semester they're taking 2 more courses. And in those courses, the instructors were not using Yammer. But the students loved Yammer so much they created their own Yammer groups to use as part of those courses. Okay? So the students really liked Yammer. But again, I'll note that moderating discussions, evaluating participation took a lot of time. There aren't really great built-in tools for instructors on Yammer. I'd like to see some tools, especially for evaluating participation, evaluating content be developed for instructors. And in Yammer, you can't really fully replicate kind of the relational aspects of being in the classroom together. But having said that, overall, I think my experience with Yammer this last fall was a fairly successful replication of the residential course, and did allow me to actually replicate many of the things about the residential course without losing my teaching philosophy, and allowing me to keep the same basic course design. So that's my experience with Yammer. Yes.
Well, can I ask, what discourse or activities went on at the course level? You focused, I think, on the groups mainly.
Very little.
Okay.
Very little. So there were some, course management type stuff. If I had to change something in the schedule, or very little in terms of engaging with material happened at the course level.
So essentially, the students in the groups, that was the class for them. They didn't experience the other 25 students.
That's right. There were a few times when something happened within a group that I thought was important to share with the rest of the class. So I would share that conversation with the rest of the class. But by and large, you're right. It was mostly they experienced the class within their groups.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jonathan. So next is Susanna Lynn.
Hi. I am Susanna Lynn in the Department of Political Science, and I thought, as Jonathan was saying, I've been here pretty much half my life, so a little bit longer. I'm going to show you how Yammer was active while I tell you a little bit about my experience with it. While I've been here a long time, I have taught political science 429, the analysis of elections, just one time before thinking about using Yammer. The goals of the course are primarily to have students answer 2 questions about politics, why voters vote the way they do, and why election outcomes are what they are. And the other is to master an analytic data-based way of answering those questions, not just in the classroom, but to take it after class as well. And my philosophy really is that students learn political science by doing political science, that they learn from each other, and so in the classroom, the class is capped at 35. We sit in a circle, we use name tags for a while, we get to know each other, and they work also in groups, much like what Jonathan described. And I think that my role is not to provide them information that they can get on their own, but to figure out how they can use information themselves to answer problems. The course is designed in some ways quite similar also to Jonathan's, where we tackle a question really about every 2 weeks. They do some reading and some theoretical background. And then we as a group in the classroom decide what kind of information do we need, and can we go out and get it. And then students go collect data They do some analysis, they make tables and graphs, do those kinds of things. And then we share them in class. And at the end of one of the class sessions, they spend about 10 or 15 minutes using the information that they've collected to write on a specific point of the question that I give them. And I did this once, and it was successful, but there were a lot of sort of rough edges. And I met with Larkin Hood at the Schreier Institute, and she put me in contact with Matt and also Bart Purcell, and they went through a variety of different technologies available, and Yammer seemed to be a really fantastic option. In particular, the first thing that attracted me to Yammer was the ability to have groups, and in particular workspaces for the students using groups. And I'll show you here one of the groups. So students, I have lots of groups. You can see on the left here, there are a whole bunch more if I hit that more button. And students could communicate with each other about the data projects that they were doing, and they did do that in all sorts of, I'm not used to this kind of machine here, all sorts of conversations about what they were doing, sharing of the projects that they were working on. They had to do a PowerPoint presentation at the end on one of their projects. They could, this is what I get for not hooking up my own machine. In the files option up here, they could upload the work that they were doing, and I could go in. I was a member then of each of these groups. I could monitor what they were doing. They could ask me questions. I could kind of push them gently toward things if they were kind of getting outside the scope of things. And one of the things that was really nice for me was I wanted a way to be able to easily present the information that students were collecting to the class as a whole when we were then in the classroom. And as a member of each of these groups, I could go and click, let's say, on Jordan's group. Actually, one of the students decided to work alone, which was fine. Select their files and do things like, here's some, pull up a graph that he had made with the data, and we could talk about what he had found. The students could look at it, and we could sort of jump from one student's work to another student's work or another group's work pretty easily, and they could share that information. And that was a real nice way to sort of jump around and do things. One of the other advantages, as you can see here, I did this after we showed them as groups, but when I went in to grade the students' work, when they had PDF files, I could add comments to the work that then the students had and could see. And I could also go back and look over the course of the semester and read through the comments that I had written to keep track of how students' work was evolving. And that was really fantastic. The other thing that was an obvious attraction when Matt was showing me things is, this looks like Facebook. So students, it was real intuitive for them to use. There are things that weren't so intuitive at the outset, and that was managing files and working with notes. But this quickly became an obvious attraction as the semester wore on. Notes provides a way for students to do some collaborative writing. And here, it's not Google Docs, but the students could each get in, work on a written part of an assignment, and edit each other's work, track what they were doing. I could go in and do the same kinds of things. And I started creating their homework assignments as kind of living documents here where I could put links, links to things that they were doing. And since this was a course on the 2012 election, everything was changing constantly. New information was constantly being provided. And it was easy to go in and insert things in here that the students were finding. And they were always, on top of things, and things could work. It's real-time kind of learning again, which was fantastic. One of the other advantages that came clear later in the class was, and where did my chat, so here we go, was the chat function. So I was logged on pretty much all the time to Yammer in the background, and students, when they had questions, would just ping me with a chat question. So it was real easy to get back and forth answers to questions with students, and that became both a blessing and a curse. Because if you were on, you were on, and you were available to them, but it was something that the students really valued. On the downside, as you can see over here in this list of all these groups that I had, I know Matt has mentioned this when I've talked with him too, about all these groups, and it was hard to, it's a practical matter, keep track of the groups and what everybody was doing. So it was a good in theory, but it didn't work quite as well in practice. I think doing this private network might be a good solution to that problem. The other thing is the main conversation, this gets a little bit to your question, the main conversation threads for the class. I had hoped that students would be sharing information like, I saw this new poll released that we talked about in class. There was a link to it, or there was the story, or Nate Silver was on the Daily Show last night, and he talked about this aspect of something that's relevant to our class. But if I sort of scroll through here, you'll see that my picture, oops, I'm not on the main page. I'm still in Jordan's group. If I scroll through the main thread, you'll notice my picture is the one that's there pretty much all the time. So students weren't sharing a lot of information here. This was pretty much me pointing out things that were happening in the election, or making general announcements about practical issues dealing with the course. Which was fine, but I had really hoped that there would be more dialogue there, so I'd like to try and come up with better ways to use that in the future. Probably the biggest downside from the student's perspective is that there is no good way to handle grading. And they don't like Angel, but they like the fact that in Angel they can go and know what their grade is all the time. And there's just no facility for that at all here. And it meant that I ended up sort of emailing them constantly with information about their grades, and that took a lot of time and was no fun at all. In hindsight, I think the thing to do is to tell them, I'm giving them grades on their assignments, here's the formula, you figure out where you're doing it, or some option like that outside the context of Yammer, perhaps. The other thing is that the collaborative writing tools are really underdeveloped as of yet, and there are no collaborative tools for working in Excel. But this, as Microsoft is going to be coming on board and part of this, that there should be more tools in the future for this. And I'm looking forward to revisiting Yammer at that point. The only other thing is that if students weren't regularly on Yammer, it was easy for things either to get lost down at the bottom of the conversation list, and so they could miss things. And for some people that became a problem. And I found that probably half the students really liked Yammer, and half the students, maybe not quite half, but there were a lot of students that really said, I don't want to do this again, I wouldn't want to use this again. And I do think it was primarily the grading and those who weren't on there with great enough regularity to keep track of things, so they got frustrated. So I'm not using it this semester. I'm teaching the same class. I decided not to use it, but I do think that in the future I'll use it if given some better collaborative tools for the students. I do wish that some of the interface things were a little bit more academic focused, but that's not its origin. So we'll see. They keep working for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Bradley.
Hi, folks. Came down from Erie, Pennsylvania. Noticed we brought the weather with us.
Thank you.
We're leaving soon, so it'll clear up by tomorrow. I'm hearing a lot of similarities with both Jonathan and Suzanne, the way we approached Yammer. Again, I'm up at Barron. I've now taken 8 classes, about 200 students, I think, through Yammer. I've used it last semester and this semester, mostly with freshman composition, but also a course in Buddhism and an honors composition this semester. So talking about the robustness of the writing tools, I'll speak a lot to that. Rather than repeat some of the things we've already talked about, maybe what we could do is I'll focus on what I did a little bit differently. A lot of the material is very much the same. One of the issues that I ran into right away was the issue of the all company versus the external networks. Originally, when I first started last semester, I was simply creating groups in my feed. Now, when you click more, unless you're going to delete every class that you're working with every semester, this gets unwieldy very quickly. You can't alphabetize it, you can't sequence it, it's by activity use. So this became a real problem because I created 14 groups last semester between classes and teams in that group. So that's when I latched on to what Jonathan was talking about and started creating external networks. Now the way I do the external network, however, is a network for the semester. I do some cross-class collaborative work. I teach 3 sections of freshman composition. One of their final collaborative projects is a team group where the teams are not all in the same class. They're in 3 different classes. So this is their main collaborative tool. So now it's a much cleaner interface, and students seem to like this approach much better. So actually I went ahead and created fall 2013, spring 2014. I don't know if that's a good idea or not, but I went ahead and did it anyway. So that was probably the first thing that I did. The second thing I discovered was that I was able in class, because with English 15, I was able to do practice exercises in class because we're in labs. And I'm not sure, I kind of thought this was a one-off, but perhaps this might spark an idea here for how somebody might use something like this. We do a lot of work with, say, MLA formatting. It seems very basic, but it can be very difficult for students. So as an example in class, I just didn't plan this. It just happened one day. Let's all hop on Yammer right now. If you would please pull a quotation from today's reading in MLA format. If I like it, I click the like on it, you did it well. If I didn't, there's something not right. And then we retool that, and then I can easily go back, see which ones I didn't like yet. I said, doesn't mean I don't like you. But there may be some more work to do. And that's worked out really well, and there have been a lot of opportunities in the labs to do this. Now, in, for example, the religious studies class, however, things are a little bit different. We spend a lot more time in the Buddhism class clarifying content. So to that end, we use it as a discussion tool. Now, to show you, again, a little bit, hard to see it, I'm sure, but in the Buddhism course, for example, I might say, well, let's take today's reading and unpack it. If we were to imagine bullet points from Sagya Rinpoche's Tibetan Book of Living and Dying about her advice for helping the dying, that's a very difficult subject for students to talk about. Sometimes in class, it's an uncomfortable subject. But from home or on their mobile devices, it was very easy for them to do this. I had students tell me that they used this as a study guide for the exams, which I thought was very interesting. As the semester progressed, I began to see a lot more of that sort of thing. So that's sort of how I used it. I didn't use it for collaborative writing. Students really would love the one-stop shop. They'd like to have it all there. Hey, where's the course announcements? I'd like to see the prompts, the grades, do it all in Yammer. This is really not like that. I do Google Docs. We do Yammer for what we use it for, which is mostly discussion. So observations, the first one is literacy, and I think this is something we all struggle with, and I'm not simply talking about students, I'm including myself here. Right away, students began responding with Yammer, I can't stand all the emails I'm getting from it. And so I actually walked them through notifications and how to turn off all 12 kinds of emails you might get from Yammer. So walked them through this screen. It's not hard to find. It's right there in the menus. Others said, I really didn't like seeing the all company feed. So, well, there's all, top, and following. You can click following and you'll never see it again. But still, they were bothered by some of these interface issues that they don't see on Facebook, which is what they're accustomed to and that they think is intuitive. So there were some literacy issues there that we kind of got past. I was so proud of one of my students. She went and posted to all company. They get a kick out of calling Penn State all company. She posted to all company. She created a Buddhism group on her own and was posting questions about concepts in the class to all of Penn State. I was so impressed. And I came in and I said, wow, what motivated you to want to reach out to the whole community? And she said, oh my God, did I do that? She couldn't find the group, so she accidentally created it. So there is a little bit of that. One of the other reasons to move to external networks is where you post your content to, and making sure you post it to the group. So there were a few literacy issues there. I think we both touched on, all of us touched on the idea of engagement, and to me it was very gradual. I had students in the beginning of the semester, 200 students, some who just plain did not post. Others who posted very little, some who thought like means I participated. So I'm gonna click like on these 3 posts, I'm done, I'm good to go. So we talked a lot about that because it's very intuitive, they think it's very much like Facebook, they very much like that aspect of it, and yet their behaviors are not Facebook-like when they begin. It tends to be from very little posting to tentative to a like to a little bit more material, but then you sort of get a sort of discussion board feel to it where it's here's my post, I'm done, here's my post, I'm done, until I noticed that it gradually started to become more and more interactive to the point where students were having an issue. They were burning to tell the class something, and they would just take off. And so a lot of threads stopped being made. And if you were to see the names on this one, I'm not in this thread at all. I had a very mixed feeling about getting involved in the discussions because I noticed what would happen is once I got involved and I'd have this great answer to the question, but they were playing with the ideas, but as soon as I posted my answer, they stopped posting. So if you're not involved at all, at least my experience, if I'm not involved in a thread at all, students start to think, well, maybe he's not even looking at this, right? So they might not be using it, but if you're uber involved in it, that could tend to shut down discussion, which I found to be a problem. So the interaction increased, the mobile use, Jonathan was saying, did increase gradually over time, but again, still kind of a mixed bag. Students were coming out of the woodwork, students who were shy, not normally saying anything in class, and as I'm sure most of us are aware, small group discussion, not everything gets to whole class discussion, let alone the other groups, let alone to the instructors. And I myself was finding a lot of great ideas coming out of Yammer that I never otherwise would have seen. And this sort of thing continued throughout the semesters. I didn't expressly encourage or discourage particular behaviors beyond discussion in Yammer, but what I found is students did begin exploring, posting polls to their teams. Hey, what topic will we write about? I'll post a poll and see what everybody on the team thinks about it. I did see some students start to mess a little bit with notes and uploading files, but they ran into some issues. They weren't sure how to do the annotation, and I was teaching Google Docs anyway. So I can't really speak to the comparative strengths or weaknesses there. I use Google Docs because I happen to favor it's a pretty robust tool. For me, Yammer works really well as the sort of Facebook clone, but not so much as the project managey, wibbly wobbly, timey wimey kind of thing. So, impacts. Let students speak for themselves. Had quite a few students. We did a survey at the end of the semester last year, asking students about what they thought. Well, this is the minority opinion, at least in my experience. Didn't like it. It was something more to do. Didn't care for it. And that may, in fact, have very well reflected in grading. However, the majority opinions were that last guy, get him to post more. Because on the teams and in the groups, they were noticing some students weren't as active. They were actually asking me to require students to post more so that on the teams, people would be participating and not getting lost in the discussions, which I thought was kind of interesting. So that was one interesting sort of impact. Some students' first experience using social networking in the classroom made communicating with my group easier, convenient to use, like the way Facebook was, and I would suggest using it more. I heard this an awful lot, and to echo what we were talking about a little bit ago, have more classes on Yammer. Students, I don't know if they went and created new groups for after the class, but they were very, very, very excited about what they could do with Yammer. Now, in the future, there's a few things I'd like to see. The analytics in Yammer, not very robust. You can sort of see the post count, but you can't really easily judge the quality of what each person was posting. My horrible workaround was to expand all the threads, save it as a PDF file. Then I could set the student's name and it would call up all the instances of their posts. It was a workaround, but it worked. I probably would start introducing more of the wide world of Yammer, get students more involved in other groups, possibly creating groups as well, and of course, spread the word. And one thing I thought I should mention, as far as impacts go, the survey that we did at the end of the semester, some of the results were interesting, and I think this is from all of our classes. If you look at the responses of agree or strongly agree together, Yammer made me think more about concepts outside of class, 61%. Gave me more time to reflect on in-class comments, 64%. The quality of interaction with classmates increased, 66%. Quality of interaction with the instructor, 57%. Some room to work on that. I feel more connected to my classmates because of Yammer, 60%. And ownership of content, I feel that I own my own content, 97%. And if that's not spreading the word, that's from the students' own mouths. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to, Mayor, just is going to be a QA session here. A couple quick disclosures. The actual, I'm not sure everyone knows this. Yammer is a fully supported service here at Penn State now. Okay, and you're in luck because it also has a community manager who happens to be here. So if we get to any technical questions, Derek Ittler's in the back. He's basically Yammer guy for if you have any questions on the platform itself. But for questions around the design, pedagogy, around teaching and learning, please talk to our panel here. So
The issue of tools came up, I think everybody mentioned it. Is there a plan to do that locally, or is that something that, the Yammer emperor has to do?
So are you asking I'm not quite sure.
Analytics of the sort
The
that
analytics.
you just mentioned
Just
before.
to-
I mean, I don't think there's really any support for that.
Right, yeah, that's, the vendor controls that, and Derek can kind of address that. We've gone over this with Yammer themselves about having more robust analytics. For instance, one thing we'd like to see, we talked about, comes up a lot of our conversations here at Penn State, is I'd like to have analytics at the group level. We don't have that. So actually our senior director of TLT is here, Cole Kia, please.
So Yammer has a really deep API, and we're actually building an analytics dashboard for Yammer right now so we can get at some of these kinds of things. Yammer sort of focuses almost entirely on the Fortune 500 enterprise users. We've just sort of seen it as an interesting tool that moves over into this side. But if there are ideas for the kinds of things you'd like to see built into an analytics package, there's a Yammer users group within Yammer. Just drop those in there because we are actively building that right now. And it's some really stunning work, actually. It's very visual and it shows engagement around key terms and some other kinds of things. So it will get better, but we need deeper ideas on what it is that would support the kinds of activities that are going on. And the other thing I'll mention around tools, Office 365 will be integrated with Yammer. So all that stuff that we're talking about, spreadsheets and everything, you'll be able to do Office 365. And if you have Office on your machine, you can work on them locally and it'll sync through Yammer, and so you can do all the kinds of stuff.
So there's two of the big three, and the last thing, all we need to do now is just drop it into Angel, right?
Did you say drop Angel?
Not responding to that.
Into.
I was hiding behind the table.
Got lower.
There was a comment about getting to the grade book in Angel. We're actually adding a feature right now that Terry, please go over here. But it's a concept like deep linking, to be able to have a URL and send you to any page in Angel. So what we might be able to do, it's not really ready for prime time, so we don't have a method to create these URLs. I can create one manually for you, give it to you, that would link a student to pretty much any page in Angel. It does all the security for it in front of it. So I'm not sure if we have one for the grade book. We have one for the reports tab. We have one for getting content, a whole bunch of other things. But we can get you something like that. And I'll definitely add one to our list for getting you to the grade book. If there's anywhere else in Angel you want to go, I can get you the calendar, we can get whatever it is. Just, I guess, work with the Yammer gods at TLT and they'll get in touch with us and we can somehow work around that way. Just don't, if you search for Andrew Fisher at Penn State, there's like 10 of us.
I just want to add what Andy said. Last week we demoed that for Blackboard, and next week we're looking at possibly adopting that functionality in not only in Angel, but in your Learn platform.
It's the whole concept of Angel isn't best for everything, but some tools are okay for some things. So we want to get you to those tools directly and skip all the other stuff.
If you create an external network group and you invite people who are not in the Penn State network to join, do they have to become a friend of Penn State?
No, we do not.
So you can,
Yeah, in fact, just to let you know, I've collaborated with people outside the Penn State network quite a bit. I created my own external network, and I've created groups in there, and it's been super effective. In fact, we created a Yammer group to coordinate this presentation. So actually, this is the first time I think everyone's met face to face today. So.
I'm thinking, I teach math education, I can create a group then of pre-service teachers who want to work with an in-service teacher. And so as she's in her classroom and comes across situations, it could be something that she can pose for discussion purposes.
Yeah, they would just create a Yammer account.
Yep.
They would need a Penn State or a Penn State.
Yep.
But then they'd be walled off from the actual Penn State side.
Is the content in Yammer searchable by Google, or is it secure and private?
It's searchable within Yammer.
Yeah.
Google doesn't index anything inside of Yammer. Everything inside of Yammer is varying degrees of private. And what that means is it can be open, but it's only open to the Yammer communities, right? So the Penn State, but the search is very, very powerful. Not only does it search tags, it can find groups, it can find people, it can find documents. So and it even looks at the PDFs and things like that. So
I
it's very-
should add also too that you can create open or closed networks as well as open or closed groups. I actually chose closed groups and networks. With the religion class in particular, I thought some of the issues there might be sensitive, so I said, within our class, no one outside our class will see this. And maybe that's one of the reasons why it opened up to the degree that it did, but that choice is there at the network and the group level for each individual networking group, which is very
Well,
important.
once you make it one way, it stays that way, so it's be intentional.
No, I think of that.
If it's private, it stays private.
But then nothing prevents you from making a second group public or private, and make all the first ones.
Nathan, you had a question.
Yeah, I kind of want to change the line here, because I've been thinking actually about something you said. And in my mind, engagement is kind of the holy grail in education, right? How do you possibly engage every student in your activities? It's not just the holy grail, it's a factual possibility. But how do you maximize that? The thing that's interested me is the fact, the different media attracts different types of students, and some students they latch onto technology faster than others, and there's a lot of different factors involved. And I was very interested in the numbers that you kind of gave on the survey. And it sounds like students generally are pretty engaged, and I'm pleased to hear that. One of my curiosities would be, how would that compare, and I don't know if anybody's done this, but how would that compare to an in-person version of the same class, A, and then B, what suggestions might you as a panel have to increase engagement overall, given those?
Are you talking about increasing engagement within a tool like Yammer, or just in any regard?
Well, using the tool, how would you do it? I mean, because Brad mentioned there were students that said, just make your students do it, make the other students do it. That's not really fair. That's not fair to the teacher, that's not fair to the peer. And what is fair is to encourage. What is fair is to entice, but to require is actually to require somebody to learn. That kind of flies in the face.
So basically, how do you think you would increase engagement, given the way the platform
What
runs?
strategies would you suggest to somebody who is encountering difficulty with engagement in Yammer?
Make it part of their course grade.
So you would require.
I did. Actually, 40% of their grade came from their participation in Yammer. So,
But that's an online class too, so.
It's an online class.
Right.
But see,
So-
that's an interesting thing, right? It's
But-
an online class, whereas you guys both have blended courses. And I think that's very instructive, because in an online class, you kind of expect that. You go into it expecting, I've got to do it online. Guess what? Yammer's online. This is the tool, the mechanism we're going to use. But in a blended course, it appears to be quite different.
So Brad, how do you
Well,
think?
two ways I approached that. I also made it part of the course grade, but it was a wibbly-wobbly class participation that I'll be factoring it into your participation. I kind of let it go at that in the beginning. As the semester progressed, I didn't want them to see it as something that, at least it varies from course to course, in other words. English 15, by the time we get to the collaborative project, which takes a few weeks at the end of the semester, I flat out tell them collegiality is part of the grade on the project, where they're grading each other, and a lot of that will depend on your participation in Yammer. So even if they're spending some time being tentative with it as the semester progresses, I make it known from the get-go, from day one, this is one of the tools we'll be using. For example, let's say you don't like Angel. Well, the drop boxes for the assignments are on Angel. You're going to have to use this tool. And I tell them the same thing with Yammer. You're going to have to use this tool. But we work our way into it. My sense, again, is the gradual engagement. And I'm in favor of that. I don't expect students to come out of the gate really fast with that sort of thing. I've noticed it sort of naturally develop, however, in the religion class, where it was me at the head of every thread, and that started to shift as the semester went on. Some posted more than others. I didn't give a minimum number of posts. I've still been treating it fairly experimentally. But I think the combination of telling them from the get-go, yes, we will be using it, you will have to use it, it will factor into your grade, and we'll use it in an increasing proportion by the end of the semester. I'd say 95% of students reacted very strongly to that. However, those wonderful numbers I mentioned at the end, there are a few not so wonderful numbers that I'd be remiss if I didn't also mention that came out of the poll. And a few of the things that came up were whether or not students would believe that, let's see, these were a little bit lower compared to face-to-face reactions. How would you rank Yammer? And these numbers were a little bit lower, and it's interesting to maybe mention some of these. Students said, the question was, I prefer to share and discuss because it's convenient on Yammer compared to face-to-face. Only 38% agreed with that. Updates on course materials and assessments more easily than through other channels, 39%. So there is some questions. I prefer to share and discuss on Yammer, I'm more comfortable on Yammer than I am in the classroom. Only 28%. And that's agree and strongly agree together. So as an adjunct to that process, I think it's very valuable, but at least for the classroom space, it's not a replacement.
Susanna, do you have any thoughts since you had?
Mostly I was really using this for workspaces. I didn't require any participation on Yammer in terms of conversations or discussions. It was really for them to be able to collaborate with each other. So, yeah, but I would like to figure out more ways to use the conversation so that they are talking to each other.
One of the things I thought about as you guys were talking is, again, Brad, you mentioned something very interesting to me. Once the teacher speaks, the conversation's over, right? What were the types of things that you said in those posts, right? If you answer the question, then of course the conversation's over because the authority has spoken. But I wonder if the nature of the questions you ask in part of that conversation if you noticed any changes there with the student participation.
Mostly I'm talking about divergent questions. This wasn't a simple case of I answered it, we're done. These were very wide-ranging discussions with a range of acceptable answers. And as teachers, again, it's that tendency to, can I just pull back and let them do it? They're doing fine. So what I found was I would give my 2 cents on it, and then they just would stop responding. They would think that was the definitive answer. And I actually made that a teaching point in class to say, just because I posted that doesn't mean it's the final voice. Please continue. And some would, but it made me purposefully step back from a lot of the discussions or wait until, say, there were 25, 30 posts on a thread before I might say something. I found also it helps to ask clarifying questions in response to a particular student post. Something that I'd love to say something about, but hey, what do you think about this aspect of this? And let that go. And I found that was an invitation for students to post more as well. So that actually increased engagement.
So anyway, I'm going to have to shut this down right now because it's time for lunch. Unless people want to stay and you guys want to stay and answer some questions, but it kind of is official release time, and if you want to get your table down there and get set up to eat. But there will be a Yammer table in the demo area this afternoon starting at 1:30.
Yeah, 1:30.
So Derek will be there, and if you guys are around, you're on the Yammer table, you can ask questions.
Fascinating to hear some other. Nobody else at Barrett is using this thing at all.
Oh, really?
So that I know.
You guys going to lunch?
No, I got to get home.
You
Probably will be, yeah. I'll be
Great job. Thank you. Nice man. It's fantastic. We'll talk to each other more. Now that I'm kind of, yeah, we're done with the project. Well, let's come back. No, this is great.
You gonna have to leave for lunch?
I know, I gotta go eat. We've got a keynote starting
Yeah.
12:45. Learning analytics. We're learning analytics is this week. Are you gonna be around all day?
Yeah, yes, yeah. I'm glad, yeah. Welcome here.
Yeah, man, you gotta stay. Yeah.
Feels like home today. It's great.
Snow on the ground at your stuff.
Not at all. So maybe by the time we get back up there, I'm not sure. But yeah, it's fascinating to hear how you guys are using this. It's really informative. Because,
Yeah.
it kind of felt like Desert Island. You know, Wayne and I have been working with some ideas and things, but no one else. I think we have one other person who's learned there. That's it.
Well, this, what happened was when I looked for engagement, you guys were saying, and then I just happened to through Yammer, Wayne, like halfway through, someone who uses Yammer. Well, okay. So let's get that. So, as part of the
Was that to you?
the
Interview me about Yammer.
did.
Well, we had a few beers and we were talking about Yammer, and he said, "I'm just going to record this." I thought it might have been you. He sent it to me.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, that's right.
I didn't know anyone